Hello, and thanks for tuning into our latest installment of our interview series for the AIA Colorado Practice and Design Conference. Today we're in for a real treat as I'm joined by two principals of the award-winning Canadian architecture firm, Thom Architects, Mr. Thom and Mr. Michael Heaney. Thom is a global thinker who, through the strength of his architecture, has encouraged communities in Canada and around the world to raise their ambitions and strive to improve their condition. His natural curiosity, coupled with intensely critical thinking, has resulted in architecture of innovation and a quest for excellence that is at the forefront of what is being produced in this era. Mr. Michael Heaney is the business partner of the firm and a longtime colleague of Thom and has worked at BTA since 1989. Based in Vancouver, BTA is a firm of visionary architects and planners who share a fundamental belief in the transformative power of great architecture to uplift not only the physical, but also the economic and social conditions of a community. I'd like to thank you both for taking the time to speak with me today.
Well, one correction I just want to make. Michael is more than a business partner. He helps to keep us in business, but he's much more than a business partner. He's as much of the creative process as I am.
Well, I apologize for that.
Sure.
I want to give all due respect where it's due. Just to start things off, can you briefly outline your firm and the important work that you all do?
Sure. Do you want to start? Or?
No, you go ahead. Mike.
Well, I mean, we're a relatively modest-sized firm. We're only about 30 people. And we refer to ourselves as generalists, and that we practice all different kinds of architecture and lots of different scales. And I think that's the richness of that general practice, which makes us good at doing lots of different kinds of projects. I mean, one of the things that there are a number of things that are really important to us, but one of the things is that architecture is the most public of all the arts, and we feel with that comes this broader responsibility than just to satisfy the design brief, but that we really have this obligation to society and to the communities that we work in, that regardless of who our client is, that we have this duty to the community to do something greater than just satisfy the design brief.
So I guess you could say, since green and sustainability is so important to architectural profession, we want to remind everybody that there is the whole social issue of the social green, that sometimes we forget about.
Triple bottom line, absolutely. Your arena stage at the Mead Center for the Performing Arts there in Washington, D.C. Is a stunning example of your work. Can you briefly describe this project, what it means to your firm, and how it embodies your philosophies regarding architecture?
Well, I think firstly, it's an area that's been very much kind of treaded over very heavily by urban redevelopment projects of the 60s. And so that whole area was very much raised. Some 4,000 families were moved out. Arena Stage, together with some of the development that came afterwards, was an attempt to try to revitalize this neighborhood. When we came along, there was a big discussion about whether or not the two existing older buildings by Harry Weiss should be retained or not, or whether or not we should raise them, rebuild on the site, or even go across the street. But we really felt it was important to keep them and then redevelop them, because the Fitch Handler, which is the arena shape, is a very important building that was built in the early 70s, and then the Krieger, which is a proscenium stage, was also one of the early prosceniums that set example for many proscenium theaters across the nation. So we thought we needed to kind of take these two buildings and reinvigorate them in the neighborhood. Because a lot of the people in the neighborhood was very fearful that Arena was actually even going to leave that area. And so the fact that it is successful is because on opening day, over 10,000 people showed up to kind of visit the building and celebrate it.
It was actually 15,000 people, so it was a huge crew. But I think that we spent a lot of time looking beyond the property lines. We're not built beyond the property lines, but we spent a lot of that time. And I think because we did that, early on, the mayor of Washington, Anthony Williams at the time, he saw what we were doing, and he realized that this could be a linchpin for the whole redevelopment of this area. So he actually hired us to be part of the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative and to look at the areas around the arena to see how we could redevelop those, that sort of whole waterfront, which is now going ahead, which is really exciting for us. Is those projects across the street.
That sounds like a very exciting project. We could probably talk about that for an hour.
Just don't hang up the phone.
I read on your website that being you're originally from Hong Kong, your firm is based in Canada, but you do work all over the world. Can you briefly describe some of the issues of working across cultural and geographic boundaries as it relates to architecture?
Well, I think the fact that many architects are now practicing globally, it's all the more important to stress the whole issue of cultural integrity and the continuity of designing buildings that fit within their place in the community that they grow from. So even though we do practice globally, we're very selective as to how many projects we take on, because each of these projects, if you look at Washington, it's over 10 years. The Texas project we've been doing is been 6 years. The project that we first did in China some 15 years ago is now maturing, and now I'm back again into that city to do more work. So it's not that we hopscotch all over the world. We pick and choose where we work. But once we decide we're going to focus in that area, we tend to stay in that area and grow our roots in that area.
And I think, in terms of our team here at the office, is that we're a very cosmopolitan group here. There's probably 12 different nationalities. We pride ourselves in having, speaking lots of different languages here. And I think coming from that context really helps us, or you just naturally develop a sensitivity to sort of people's cultural background and different ways of thinking about the world. And I think that's been very helpful as we've gone and worked in different parts of the world.
So do you guys...
The reason we've been successful in each of these places, I think the clients realize we're not just importing kind of stylistic versions of, projects in one city and import it to another city. We try to find the root of the culture from which we work in.
Very important. Does your firm actively market globally?
We hardly ever market it. Most of our jobs come from clients who have heard of us or have visited our building. Like we're now doing a new art museum for the Rubels, who are in Miami, but they have decided to want to build a new art museum in Washington, D.C., and they went to Arena, they looked at it, phoned us up, and in one night they said, well, you're our architect. We've looked at other architects all over the world, but we decided that you make sense for us because you resonate with us in terms of your values. So they've taken over an old abandoned high school, and we're trying to turn this high school into one of the great art museums of the world.
Wow. And they've also realized that we appreciate Washington, even though we're not from Washington, that we sort of have taken the time to really understand the sort of nuances of Washington, in particular the Southwest neighborhood. And so that was what attracted them as well. So.
Do you have you found any issues, or how do you go about protecting your intellectual property and your income in a global market? Has this been an issue for your firm, and how have you approached this dilemma?
I don't worry too much about that. I think that's what made architecture so great. We don't really play on the idea of to be copied is actually a great compliment, and I think copyright has never worked for architecture, and that's what made architecture so great, because I'm one that really is against copyrights, because I think they inhibit innovation, really.
Interesting. Very good. Given that you do work on projects in diverse locations and with diverse groups of people, what are your thoughts on the perception of the architect and their role in solving societal problems?
Well, I think, I guess particularly in the United States, we found is that architects aren't necessarily seen as that's a role that they should play. And I think that when we do, but if you're in Europe, it's just more accepted that architects have a broader sort of view of things. I think that's one of the things that we bring to our clients in the communities where we work in the U.S. is that we tend to get quite involved in the community and all the things that are going around. And people are surprised by that, but in fact it's been advantageous, because often, particularly in projects where funding may not be that certain, it's a way of sort of broadening the support for the project, and often that's where the funding comes from. So, for instance, in Washington, after we were able to sort of convince or show the community how important this theater was, the district actually came in with some of the most substantial funding for the project of anybody, and that wasn't thought of as being possible at the beginning before we got involved. So I think that's something that people don't think of architects playing that role, particularly in the U.S., but it's certainly a role that can be played.
I think certainly with the economy changing, there is tremendous opportunity for the architects to reinvent themselves. I think when times are good, architects tended to retreat back and kind of given away the peripheral parts of their practice, planning, urban design, landscape, interior design. Now when the economy shrinks, architects can become more generalist again and go back to their tradition. That's why we call ourselves master architects. So we actually practice not defensively. I think the whole issue of litigation in the United States has hurt the architect quite a bit. So we keep practicing worrying, and so we keep shrinking. We as a firm, we actually keep expanding, exploring. We go beyond our tendency to kind of retreat into a smaller area of knowledge. We try to expand our area of knowledge. So it's really, I think we lack in society now the architect as a generalist. We're one of the few left that part psychologist, part economist, part artist, part sociologist, part builder, part financiers. I mean, that's what made architecture so important through so many millenniums. It's only in the last less than 100 years architects became a profession. And then gradually we narrowed ourselves more and more.
That's right. And even sort of trying to merge, try not to separate design and management. You need to have them both and integrated, So we talk about, we have this saying that design without management leads to unfulfilled dreams, but management without design leads to mediocrity. And so you have to find this way of merging the two.
Great. Your upcoming session at the Falls Conference is entitled The Transformative Power of Architecture. Can you briefly outline what our listeners can expect to hear?
Well, I think in the end it's emotive. When a user come into the building and take a deep breath and say, wow, what is that? Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean it's wow for wow's sake, but you have to reach them deeply, not through their head, but through their heart. It's something they feel. And that's what great art is about. But in the end, in order to reach that level, you have to go very deep into the problem. Like, for example, one of the most successful buildings we just finished is a library. Well, in order to understand what a library is, you have to go back through the millenniums. And you can say, well, why do people collect books? Why was it such a sacred space? Well, it's a sacred space because there is a sense of something valuable when you come into the building. And that value, in a way, is becoming less material. It's now becoming more social. So we're saying the new library is actually an expansion of your home. But the same feeling of receiving oxygen when you come into the building. One person who wrote us an email the other day said, I feel oxygenated when I come into the building. Well, that to me was a great compliment because we've given them energy. We gave them hope. And I think good public architecture needs to do that. And even private architecture needs to do that. In that we make people saying every morning when I get up, I want to work and I want to get up again the next morning. And they feel enlivened in the spaces they inhabitate. And that's where architecture is so important. It's subliminal, but it does have very powerful images to people.
I mean, it's incredible how you can see the confidence of a neighborhood change when they get a good building in that neighborhood, and it can really change the trajectory of how that community functions, and it's quite remarkable. There's this one of the projects that we'll talk about in your conference is a project in Surrey called Central City, where this is a project which took an old sort of declining regional shopping center and stuck a university on top of it, and we did it in such a way that helped to create a whole downtown for this sort of rudderless suburb. And they even changed the logo of the city from being, traditional crest to a profile of our building. And it's just as a sort of reflection of how it's changed that community.
Like in three recent buildings we finished in Vancouver, in Surrey, and in Washington, after we finished the building, they renamed the subway station after our building. That's how subliminally the buildings have integrated themselves with the community.
Very inspiring words. And like I said, I wish we had a few hours I could pick your brains. But unfortunately, we're running short on time. I really, really want to thank you again for your time that you spent with me today. And I'm really looking forward to your session at this fall's conference.
Good. Thank you.
Well, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.